Just going to talk about what EDI is and what it stands for, to recap. So EDI is the removal of, stands for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Equity is the removal of systemic barriers and biases, enabling all individuals to have equal opportunities to succeed. Diversity is the institutional welcoming of differences in race, color, birthplace, religion, immigrant status, ethnic origin, ability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and age. And inclusion is the practice of ensuring that all individuals are valued and respected for their contributions and equally supported. Just before we go over, I just want to make sure that Calgary is hearing me properly. So just want to share my screen here. Martha, Martha, we have you live. Can you hear us? Can you hear us properly? We cannot hear you.
You have to mute, Martha.
You have to mute yourselves. We cannot hear you still. Okay, so meanwhile while you sort that out, I'm going to be very brief about what is the purpose of this panel. The purpose of this panel is to discuss and moving the needle on the EDI on STEM, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics companies or institutions. And I'm very excited because today is the 4th ever EDI panel that the West or the Women in Engineering Summit is running. And the panelists that are present today will highlight their experiences with pushing for systemic change. Thank you. Advocating for themselves and others, having tough conversations, and providing their perspective on what the future of engineering looks like amidst current social movement. Now we're going to get started, and unfortunately we couldn't have all of our panelists here today, so we're going to move ahead, and we're very grateful for the ones that are. And I will invite you to introduce yourself. So probably in Calgary, I'm going to go with you if you want to proceed. So please tell us your name, your pronouns, your current title or place of work, and your involvement in pushing for equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Let's start. Hi, everyone. My name is Chao Sun. I go pronouns. I just arrived last night from China, so I'm still living in the air. She and her and hers. I'm currently professor and chair of the Department of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering at the Schulich School of Engineering at University of Calgary. Previously, I am Associate Dean of EDI and Research. So this topic is very close to my heart. So I'm really excited to be able to have this join the conversation today. So thank you. I pass it on to other panelists.
So Andrea, I'm probably going to be here with Chao. I have been involved in EDI initiatives, so I'm not necessarily representing a particular company or field, but probably what I have learned from the years doing the Women in Engineering Summit. So my name is Martha Vega-Smith. I am one of the co-chairs for the Women in Engineering Summit of 2023, her, she, and I currently work for Suncor Energy. Yeah, thank you. Back to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Chao. Martha. Now we're going to proceed with our guest in Edmonton.
Do I need to use a mic or?
You can come closer. You can use the mic. Feel free.
We can hear Jill.
You can hear me? Okay, I just moved over so I can see the folks sitting on this side of the room. So my name is Jill Chesley. I'm not an engineer. I am the diversity inclusion lead at the City of Edmonton. I've been there for 5 years. So I'm responsible for advancing EDI initiatives at the city. Prior to that, I worked at Enbridge with Martha, which is my connection to this wonderful summit. And before that, I worked with Doug, who was one of your speakers this morning at the Edmonton Region Immigrant Employment Council. So that's a bit of my history. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jill. And before we start our round of questions, I just want to give a big shout of appreciation to Innotech Alberta VP or CTO is Steve McMahon. He's here in the audience. Thank you, Steve, for supporting us, for supporting the EDI cause, and for supporting EDI Council internally. So that's how I'm involved. Okay, so we're going to start with the first question, and hopefully we can get a lot of them done today. The first one is, why does a company or an organization need to have an EDI strategy? Is it because there is a compliance situation, because there's a business case, or because there is something to do with company culture? Hi, Mega. Welcome to the panel. We're going to introduce you in a bit. What opportunities do you see in engineering and STEM by effectively achieving equity? And why are conversations about identity and EDI so important right now to this audience? And I'm so sorry, too many questions at once. So I don't know, Jill, if you want to start.
Yeah, maybe I'll speak to the first part of the question. So I feel we're sort of past the point where we should have to have a business case for EDI, but it is a part of a lot of companies' journeys. There's lots of different reasons that organizations start with an EDI strategy. It could be about compliance. It could be a fear of lawsuits or complaints around human rights. It could be for competitive advantage. But I think the companies who do it really well see that it's having an EDI strategy that they then follow through on is a part of continuous learning and growth for their company, and it makes their company better. I'm just looking at my phone to make sure I'm catching some of my notes. So in my experience, it can really enhance both recruitment and retention of employees. And I think these days, and we'll probably speak a little bit more to what these days are like, employees are demanding it, communities are demanding it, and customers are demanding it. So I know if I were to be looking at finding work elsewhere, I'd be going to the organization's website to see what they have in terms of diversity and inclusion, to see what the commitments are. So there's plenty of research that talks about the benefits of diversity in the workplace that lead to, so I'm just going to give you a couple examples. So one bit of research shows that an office split evenly among men and women, now that didn't include non-binary individuals, but men and women can increase revenue up to 41%. Ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to have financial returns above the industry standard. And conversely, those who don't have that kind of diversity perform below the industry standard, above financial returns. And something that D&I efforts often address, or even tangentially, is uncivil behavior in the workplace. And there's definitely a cost to that as well. So those workplaces with that kind of behavior can see up to 48% of intentionally decreased work effort, 47% intentionally decreased time at work, 38% decreased work quality, 80% lost time in just worry. So if you're dealing with harassment or something from someone in the office, you're spending your time worrying about running into that person or what's going to happen. 63% lost time avoiding that person. And then 66% reported performance declines. So I see benefits of the employee experience, people feeling motivated and engaged and valued at work, but also financial implications of an EDI strategy. Maybe I'll pass it over to Chow for her additional comments.
Thank you, Jill. Maybe along the same line, right? When we talk about strategy, I think at the university, I'm hoping too with other organizations as well. If you do have a strategy, it's a really clear statement of where your leadership is putting your resources, right? Because having a strategy, not only it's a statement, but also it really directs how you're gonna spend your resources. What's your priority, right? And it also make it clear of transparency, like what's the value, right? Like a lot of us in the old days, we kind of have to second guess, right? If there is no clear strategy and it's not written somewhere, you kind of decide or determine your leadership priority based on what they do, right? And then there is this transparency issues that you don't know. And it's really hard to align your personal development with, organizational priorities for your professional development, right? So at the university, when we, rely on government funding, it's really important so that we know, right? The other thing I wanted to say about the value of EDI, right? I agree with Joe that we've already passed the point of debating, whether it's important. We all know it is. I know some of my graduate, like I'm a professor who have, supervised graduate students. I know a lot of my students when they graduate and they come back to tell me because very competitive, right? There are a lot of companies going after them, trying to recruit them. And eventually I always ask, so why did you choose this company versus the other? So there are a few things that I heard recently, recent years. One is what business are they in, right? Whether it's more future facing technology, for example, renewable energy and such. And the other thing is my students were telling me whether the company has a very clear EDI statement, right? So it's no longer just a checkbox. It does have economic value, right, for companies to stay competitive because we all, wanted to not only, for company benefit, but also supporting our employees through their professional growth. Also, I found for individuals, right? We're talking about women engineering, because still engineering is still male dominated. I often feel, people ask me, why are you so passionate about trying to persuade or influence young girls to go into engineering? What if they, they should be allowed to choose whatever they want? I'm like, of course they are allowed to choose. But, I'm here to help them make informed decision, right? And oftentimes, even with informed decision, it really depends on their experience, what they know, who have they seen, right? Like if they see engineering is, predominantly male dominated, they probably don't see themselves as being one of them, right? So it's really a missed opportunity both for engineering as a profession, because, right, we know diversity really promotes innovation and creativity, problem solving, right? But also it's a missed opportunity for individuals because some people, you don't know what you don't know, right? So that's where I am thinking about not only there is a strong business case for organizations, but also, for society overall, it's just more, for cohesive society, diversity is a good thing and it's a right thing to do, right? So maybe I'll pass on to Martha or somebody else.
No, maybe we can move to another question and yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha. We have one of our panelists online that recently joined. So before we continue with our next question, I would like her to introduce herself with the name, pronouns, current title and place of work, and your involvement in pushing for EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Oh, okay. So that sounds like it's me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited. So in terms of EDI, it's something I've been passionate about throughout my undergrad. I strongly believe that EDI is a space in engineering that needs to be just worked on and encouraged, just so, we have stronger workplaces for everyone. So it's a really important area to be in. And I'm actually a graduate student in psychology. So I have undergrad in engineering, and now I'm pursuing mental health and doing research on mental health in workplaces. So I'm hoping in the future to combine my engineering technical background with our passion for mental health and bring that back to the engineering industry at some point in the future. So it's about me.
Thank you. Well, just want to say your name is Megha Sharma. So just
Yes.
in case.
Yeah, Mega Sharma.
Okay, Mega, thank you for joining. Well, we're going for our second round of questions. This one is more organizationally focused, and it's about the challenges. So what challenges have you found in expanding diversity in your sphere of influence? Can you tell us about how you have been a part of pushing for conversations and action around EDI in your professional life? And you can tell us about any champions or sponsors helping in your career or underrepresented groups you identified with. And I'll leave the room open. Who would like to take this question?
I can start.
Thank you, Jill.
So I mean, obviously how I've been a part of these conversations is that it's been my literal job, which will be different for other people who are trying to advance it sort of off the sides of their desk. The challenges that we tend to run into and that I've run into in the past come from whether or not there's leadership commitment. I just want to ask, first of all, Ken in the back, can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. If there's not leadership commitment and follow through, that's obviously a large challenge, but there can also be executive leadership support. But then when you get into the middle manager areas, it's kind of stops there. And it's a difficult place to be, there's no glory in middle management, right? You're trying to manage the work and then you're trying to also please and adhere to the vision of the folks above you. But often because EDI can be seen as a nice to have or an extra, it doesn't seem as important as, you know, building the bridge. So leadership is key. Another challenge is resistance. And I've found in my roles that there's lots of different sources of resistance. Some of the maybe most outspoken resistance is coming from those occupations that are traditionally male dominated and often traditionally white male dominated. And it's an interesting time for white men these days, right? Like, let's just be honest. and I think the resistance is based in fear. There's some fear about, what does this mean for me? Are you telling me that I didn't deserve my job? Is my son going to get hired? Like, what does white privilege mean? Like, there's just, so I see it as based in fear, but it definitely shows up as resistance. And then HR can be a place of resistance. I'm happy that it's not in my current workplace, but HR, you would think, because most D&I initiatives live in HR, right? And you think that they'd be completely on board, but no, they're just as resistant to change as any other organization. And EDI initiatives are often, we're asking people to disrupt the way they work and work differently. And in particular around systems and practices, and anytime someone's in charge of that system, there's a resistance to changing it. So there's a few ideas there.
Thank you, Jill. That was very, very helpful. In Calgary or Mega, do you want us to contribute to that answer, or you're good for the next round?
I could probably chime in as like kind of like a young professional lens. I would say some of the resistance is with myself. Like, I think I don't know what is a normal expectation. I don't know how to advocate for myself in the workplace. We're not taught these things. You know, you're like, as a young woman in engineering, you're this naive young woman in your undergrad and you are thrown into co-op at 22, 23 years old. I worked in Fort Mac and worked in a lot of different engineering fields, but I am resistant to advocating for myself because I don't know what the expectations are around me feeling sick or me feeling mentally ill or having a really sick partner, and how to navigate that in a way that's effective and provides me with the resources that I need. So as a young professional, it's also about educating the people going into the industry of like, okay, well, this is something to expect and this is how to navigate these conversations with your employer.
Thank you, Mega. Well, I think that was a very good perspective. Mark.
I'm just probably going to add on what Mega just said, and what Jill as well said. In terms of resistance, what has always worked for me as an individual, we all have biases. What are biases? There are the filters that we have for whatever we heard, whatever we grew up, or what have you. I try to identify, I try to break my biases by identifying somebody that I really love, that I really is a good friend, is a good ally, is a good mentor, is a person that I can talk to. And I try to bring that at home as well. Claudia and I sometimes talk that our husbands chose us, our partners chose us because we are different from what they grew up with, from what their norm was. But they're both white. They're both white. They were raised in a different way. So it is for us to also educate them at home, but still allowing the space for them to say what they need to say. And sometimes we start the conversation or the discussion about Donald Trump. You have your opinion, I have my opinion. We're not going to be able to change each other's opinion. And if I don't allow somebody to say what they need to say, am I any good? I'm the same as the others who are shutting other people down. So in terms of resistance, I think I try to identify with somebody that I really care for and do the same with people around me. Mega, thank you very much for your honest, candid expression. I struggle that myself. I have an advantage over you, is that I have a successful career. I have been reassured by other people that I am worthy, technically, as an individual, as an EDI proponent. But I do sometimes struggle with things that are not the common things that we talk in the workplace. Like, for example, in my case, mental health issues. So I have to keep that at bay and say, I still have things to contribute. And not only I still have things to contribute in spite of that, but I have things to contribute because of that, because I have that understanding. I can now identify and know how other people feel. And I think that, yeah, that's one of the ways that I look at EDI and how I overcome some of the challenges.
Wow. Well, that brings us to our next question, which is more personally focused. Probably we already talked a little bit about it, but we can expand more. So personally, and if comfortable, can you tell us about a time when you experienced challenges based on your diversity dimensions? For example, your race or your gender, or whether you have a disability or any other factor, and the steps that you took to deal with the situation and take care of yourself. So probably I'd like Mega to start with this answer.
Yeah. So I think it's hard because it's hard to pinpoint that, you feel a certain way because of a certain dimension, right? Like, I feel like, yeah, my experiences differ from some of the male colleagues that I work with, of course. But, it's hard to be like, oh, it's because I'm a woman necessarily, right? So it's a dimension, but it's a dimension that so for example, I have had to do a lot of inspections in my previous workplaces, and I did an inspection in an arsenic vessel, and I had to shower and clean up after that. And they only offered me boxers, like they literally didn't have undergarments for women, and I felt really uncomfortable. I had to share the same bathroom as all the other guys that went to the inspection with me, and it was kind of horrifying. So I mean, I guess like I've had those lived experiences. But you try to minimize a lot of those experiences as well, I think, as a young professional. Like I said, you're trying to come across as a contributing member of the workplace, and it's hard to know when you're being pushed and how to advocate for yourself. So I think as you gain that experience in the industry, kind of going with their gut feeling, I think one thing that I've realized is it's okay to take leaves. Like, it's okay to advocate for yourself and take leaves if you are feeling burnt out. because it's not normalized, especially in engineering. Taking a mental health leave is not normalized. You can work until your wits end. So things like that are really important.
Thank you, Mega. Before we pass to the next round, Jill or Chao, do you want, or Martha, do you want to contribute to this answer?
Maybe just follow up on what Mega said, because I see a lot of young professionals here. It seems like, we heard this over and over again, right? That support network. This is why for many of us who work in this areas, we try to build support network for folks, right? So it's really important that you also build your own support networks. There are a lot of people like us out there who are willing to support, but it works both ways, right? So always identify some people close to you meaning in the workplace that you can reach out to, right? For some advice. It doesn't have to be women, right? Somebody you trust. So building that safety net is really, really important, because some of these things, it just propagates, right? Like your experience is going to affect how you make decisions and choices in the future. And you want to start knowing that there is the opportunity that you can build that support network. And it's not just for you. Sometimes for me, I would have a lot of strength when I think I'm doing this for not just me, right? For many people like me and for others. I certainly gain a lot of strength because we all probably have that issue of we're not very self-promoting. We're, second guessing sometimes whether am I good enough or not, right? That, imposter syndrome. I mean, it's not just women, men has that as well, right? So, but then it takes, steps to build that confidence. So maybe I'll just add that point.
If I could add one thing to that.
Sure.
This is such a great conversation. So because most of the roles I've worked in have been women dominated, I haven't had the experiences like probably a lot of you have been had. But what I have found is that those times where I was vulnerable in admitting who I am, I've seen how it's impacted other people. So something as minor as I was in a meeting and I mentioned that I'm half deaf. I'm deaf in one ear, and that's why I always ask, "Can you hear me?" Because if I was sitting back there, I don't know if I could hear, right? Because my hearing is so less. And I had someone come up to me afterwards, and they were so impacted by the fact that I admitted out loud that I'm half deaf because she's half deaf, and it was like the most impactful thing for her that I had said that, and that she then saw that herself represented. Another big one is I'm also married to a woman. I'm queer, and for a large part of my career, I kind of had one foot in the closet about it. I was out with people who, like Martha probably knew, but I didn't like advertise it. I didn't maybe talk about my wife if I was doing a training course or something. But now I'm at an age where I'm kind of like, I don't know if swearing's allowed in this venue, but so I'll try to hold back. But if you have a problem with it, that's your fault. Just, so I wasn't always that way, but I've gotten to the place where I'm that way. And I have had people talk to me where that really impacted them, because then they felt like I was a safe person to reach out to, for them to talk about their sexuality that they were exploring, and to see how that's changed over time for them. So I guess my message is when you feel safe to do so and comfortable to do so, it can be really powerful to really be who you are in the workplace. And I recognize that I haven't been in some of the situations that many of you find yourselves in. I've always had clothes that fit me at work and have not had to wear boxers at any point as I wanted to. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Jill, for bringing a different perspective. It's very valuable. And we have to move on with the next question, which is about the conversations precisely. So how has the increase of conversations around anti-racism impacted equity, diversity, and inclusion? So I don't know if you want to take it, first. and-
Sure.
Yeah.
So we talked about whether to include this question in the
Yes.
panel, and I found it really important to do so because, from my perspective, we are in the midst of a pretty serious and about time societal shift around conversations around racism, with the murder of George Floyd, with the uncovering of children buried in mass graves and residential schools, with the attacks on Black Muslim women in Edmonton, and I know that there's been issues in Calgary as well. The rise of anti-Asian hate since COVID, like, it's up, and we're talking about it in a way that we just haven't in my professional career. And I'm attuned to these things because of the job I do. Even though I have the privilege of being white, so that doesn't affect me in my daily life. So this change, the societal shift, is empowering communities to speak out. It's empowering employees to speak out in a way that people haven't before. And just as an aside, I have never seen in the past 3 years so many job postings for EDI related positions, like in the past 3 years, than I have in my whole career. Like, they're just everywhere. Now, whether those positions will remain, whether those organizations will continue to resource those positions, remain to be seen. So we're finally talking about it in a real way. Having said that, what we're seeing is a real ugly backlash as well. So the conversations are being raised and horrible things are being said to each other in the media. I'm going to get a little political, but Martha mentioned Donald Trump, so I'll blame Martha for it. Like, the rise of the rise of what I consider hate and white supremacy in the States is making its way and is already in Canada. And so people are being emboldened to speak out against racism, but people also being emboldened in their hate and their white supremacy. And it's making for really difficult conversations, but hopefully ultimately positive movement.
Thank you, Jill.
Thanks.
Ciao. Mega Martha.
Yes, I completely agree. We used to think, I mean, pre-pandemic, right? When we think about diversity, there's so many dimensions. And, I mean, racial dimension or identity, right? Your background is one of those. And I found, at least in my sphere of, the community that I work with, sometimes it helps having the conversation, because oftentimes when you start talking about, women engineering, people think, oh, it's only women, right? And has been a lot of resistance. So why do we need that, right? But then the moment you start talking about other dimensions, for example, cultural differences, and suddenly you're able to engage a lot more people. So in a way, that's positive, right? And really the essence is we're all different. Like, who is not engaged, who shouldn't be, right? Like, we all are, and we should all be benefiting. But then people have their prejudice, right? They decide what the topic is even before the topic starts open, right? So I felt like having this conversation should help, right? Overall conversation, because at the end, it goes down, it boils down to the same fundamentals, right? It's the respect, the inclusive society, right? So I like to think, I mean, I totally agree. The conversation is certainly, when you start talking about anti-racism, it's very emotionally charged, because, it has this negative tone of voice, right? It's discrimination. It's, it's not as gentle as inclusion, equity, right? But I think having those hard conversations, and there's evidence of, some groups or population in the society is being discriminated against, and people see it clearly, right? I think it helps, but however, I agree, it's a very difficult conversation and how to move forward is really, very difficult, I have to say. Oftentimes you feel society takes a few steps forward and then only to roll back. I hope not more steps, but from the events unfolding in recent years, it does feel that way, right? Like, I mean, I've been in Canada for over 25 years, and the most recent, through pandemic, has never seen such a clear picture of, it just makes me nervous. But anyway, so what I can say is, yeah, I agree. I think it's we all need to be part of the conversation.
Thank you, Xiao. That's
I would love to add on to this as well. So in terms of like the EDI work, it really does show me when companies have an EDI position that they really care. Because a lot of times I find that there are EDI committees at workplaces that are led by the employees. And many of the times the employees that lead these committees tend to be the underrepresented folks, like people of color or women or the LGBTQS community. So a lot of times this work is led usually for free by underrepresented folks in the workplace. And it's a lot to take on. And then on top of that, there's so many stories of companies want storytelling. So they want you to share stories of times where you weren't being respected, for example, but there is backlash when you share those stories as well. So then how are you supporting these employees that are coming up? As a woman, I can share stories of times where it was harder for me to socialize or fit in the workplace versus a male colleague, or how much harder it was for me to have cooler type conversations. But then how am I supported when I share those stories? Because there is backlash. And at the same time, is it going to look like I'm hard to work with if I start sharing these stories of these struggles that I have in the workplace? So I can definitely see that with racism. People of color that are wanting to share these stories or expected to share these stories, and then they're not supported afterwards, or having to take on all the work to educate people around them as well when there isn't EDI professionals in the workplace to do that kind of work. And, it leads to increased burnout as well. So, the Kensian company has done studies on how people of color and women burn out at much higher rates than their counterparts.
Thank you, Mega.
I would like to add something, Andrea, about some words that I've heard through. Trust and feeling safe or having a safe space, I think, are very fundamental, I guess, when we find ourselves as individuals and not knowing if we actually can raise our voices. So I'm always very cautious about that, and I test where I am. I have had very supportive leaders, but there are some other leaders that I just would not share things with them because I don't know if I'm going to get the full support from them. I think I'm very casual. I told Jennifer, oh, you're so tall. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm just meeting her. Or a gentleman walks by and he smells good. And I'm like, oh, you smell good. I have to guard myself, on those things. But I have that way also to talk to my leaders and all that. And I got into trouble at one point in time because there was a clash of personality and way of being raised, or this person was coming from a military background, very tall, male, very, empowering presence and all that. And at some point in time, we're reviewing something, and I just sort of dismissed one of his comments because we had gone through, I needed to correct something and that thing needed to be in all the slides. And I'm like, yeah, of course. That thing will be corrected in the other slides. And I was met with that word and really with anger. Right? So I knew that I was not going to be killed, but I didn't know if I was going to get hit at that time. So I did not feel safe. And he closed the door. Of course, because he had just said it. He closed the door. I'm like, oh my goodness, today is the day that I am fired. That's what I said. The least consequence is going to be I'm going to get fired. So I would say there are lots of allies there. Find that safe space. Make a safe space for others as well, because sometimes you're in that position where you can do that. I wear hearing aids as well as Jill, and I do say that. And I do say that if I ask you, don't get offended or what have you, because that helps others to come and say, I do have another disability. I do need another accommodation. So find and create as well around yourself those safe spaces and that trust. Without that, very little people are going to come and say what they think.
Thank you, Martha. Okay, we're going for our next question, and probably we have to leave some space for the audience in a couple of minutes. The next question is about advice. So do you have any advice for individuals who want to engage in conversations but are worried about offending or stepping on toes? So maybe Chao or Mega wants, or Martha want to take that question first.
Okay, so advice for others. I would just share some of my own experience of particularly working with young women in engineering at the university's environment. We know that university, right? There are many of us, whether it's administration or professors, we're very passionate about the issue, and we identify ourselves as champions, right? So what I normally tell my students, what they need to do is, again, like I just said, try to build that support network. And it's not just for you at the university, but also when you move on into the workforce. And some of those, for example, if there are students here today, one small things, right? It seems like small. For example, we all go to others for reference letters, right? So I tell them, because we all know that there's biases when people write reference. I even checked in once I have, the knowledge. I went back to the old reference I used to write for others. I'm like, oh my God, right? Everything that's being said, being biased against women, I did that, right? Like in reference letter, words like superior, competency, it belongs to men, right? As for women, it's like attention to detail, hardworking, and those things, irrelevant. But why do we do that? It's our unconscious bias. So I'm saying, so what can we do from this point on, right? You cannot possibly assume every person who is going to write reference for you now, just because they've gone through the unconscious bias training, they're certainly going to be different. No, right? It's a long process. So what you need to do is to put words in their mouth. So you go forward with bullet point highlights, right? This is what I did. This is my accomplishment. These are the words, adjectives, right? So you help them doing their job, doing it right. So that's just one little thing. And I've seen how, I'm very successful in promoting, accomplishment of people from underrepresented groups, whether it's, seeking position or awards or recognition, right? This is one thing that I do to help them. So maybe I'll stop here and give other people some space to share their advice.
Jill, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. What I hear a lot right now from a lot of different people is, I'm just scared to say anything these days, right? I'm going to say the wrong word, someone's going to be offended, so I'm just not going to say anything. I'm even hearing things like, as we're talking in the workplace about, as a leader, if you see something, you have to address it. That's your job. Otherwise, it's implicit, silence is violence. It's implicit approval of the behavior. So I'm hearing about leaders who just go to their office and close the door so they don't hear anything. And to me, that's a particular act of cowardice that makes me very mad. So Martha mentioned safe spaces. And certainly space is safe from being punched or fired. Like, that's really scary. But we've moved more at work to be talking about brave spaces, because safe gives the sense that we're all going to be comfortable in this conversation. And we are not going to be comfortable in this conversation. So these brave spaces are about leaning into that discomfort, leaning into the exploration of your own bias, like Chow said, leaning into accepting if you've made a mistake and moving on. Like, nobody wants to feel like they're racist or a bad person, but we all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect in this work, right? So these brave spaces are really important. Another thing is that I advise to people, if you are either initiating a conversation or receiving the initiation of a conversation, assume good intent. Start by assuming good intent. Now, we know that impact is more important than intent, but intent is important. So assume that good intent, and be willing to have that conversation. And then the last thing I want to, having said that, if you are a member of an equity deserving group, it is not your job to educate anybody, and we shouldn't expect you to educate anybody. But there might be times and particular people that you feel comfortable sharing. And so if you're not of an equity deserving group, do your research before you talk to people. I've got one colleague who's cisgender who keeps asking a trans colleague all these questions, and the trans colleague is just getting really tired of answering. It's like, Google it, it's everywhere. Go, follow, what's her name? Dylan Mulvaney on TikTok or something. Like, I like TikTok. I learn a lot on TikTok. Really, the kids are smart, and they're just, all kinds of new things are coming up. And so the last thing I want to mention about this is, and Martha referred to it, is this allyship. So yes, create a support network for yourselves, and we all can be allies for each other. We all have places of privilege and marginalization in our identities. And this allyship is so key, where we're actually taking action. It's not enough to just repost stuff on Facebook or whatever. We need to act in allyship. I came across this quote that I've regendered. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. So don't do nothing, do something, right? Even if it's really small, even if you just need to read a book about something, start somewhere. It'll all contribute to, hopefully, more inclusive environments. I think that's it.
That's great.
That's my soapbox for now.
Thank you. That's a great input. Okay, I would like to know if there are any questions in Calgary that you would like us to address from the audience.
There are. What's the
mic.
do you know the mic and all that? Is it working? No.
Everyone, Alicia, you've heard me a few times today. We've talked a lot about safe and brave spaces. I do want to remind everyone that I mentioned on the past president of the Alberta Women's Science Network and I know what it's like to be the only one in your group, the only one in your company, the only one in the field. It's hard to find those spaces. That's why we exist. So if you go on the website, AWSN, you go on the CCUS, you're going to find all our partner groups. Some of these spaces already exist for you. You just don't know about them. So reach out. We have lots of knowledge. We have lots of things that we share. And we're also looking for help. That's the things that unpaid labor, but it is. Like all your things that unpaid labor, you need to do that. So please do reach out. I know the Bay has lots of great groups. The Geo Women down here, Geo Women will take engineers. Don't work on it. We like engineers. So so yes, I can't emphasize the importance of.
Thank you. I don't know. Do you understand?
I didn't catch very
Yeah,
much of that.
Martha, can you help us to summarize the comment or the question, because we couldn't understand all of it. It was not very clear.
Oh, sorry about that. It is basically that some of those resources and spaces are already there for you. So Alicia is from CC West, the coalition of
Canadian Coalition of Women in Engineering, Science, Trades, and Technology. And you also have AWSN, Alberta Women's Science Network here in Alberta. If you go on those websites, you're going to find lots of women's groups and lots of intersectional groups that can be those spaces if you can't make them within the space that you're at.
Yep.
Thank you very much. That's
Good.
great.
So that microphone is not working then.
Maybe it's.
Can you guys hear us through the microphone?
Okay.
We could hear it was just, it cut in and out and it was very sort of staticky.
It was not clear.
Do you have a question, Prabhu?
Yes. Yeah, so I have a question. This is Prabhu again. So my question is, so I'm like a member of Gen Z, and I think studies have shown that Gen Z, more so than other generations, it's really important to them to work at places where they feel that their values are shown in the work that they do and in the companies that they work for. But like other members of my generation, I've also learned to be pretty skeptical of large companies. Currently, it's Pride Month, and you'll see a lot of companies that replace their logos with like a rainbow logo. So my question is, how do I differentiate companies that are genuinely passionate about EDI and are pushing the envelope on social innovation? How do I differentiate those companies from companies that might be more performative, that are just trying to show like, oh, we're cool and we're diverse, but when you actually go in, you know, there's not that innovation, there's not that space to have difficult conversations?
That's a great question. I see Mega's hands is rise up, so we'll give the chance to Mega.
Yeah, I definitely understand how complicated that feels, so I empathize with you. What I would say is just give it a chance, because you know what, like I've been with companies that are very EDI focused, and it really depends on your team and who you're working with, where you get that feeling. So you could be at a company that's so EDI focused, but where like your experiences could not represent that at all, or you could be with a company that's really small and you know doesn't have a lot of resources for that, but they're very inclusive and they have a really good team collaboration work ethic, and they go out and hang out all the time and stuff too. So I really think yeah, don't be swayed either way. I think really just get to know the person that's interviewing you and be very direct and figure out information about the team itself. So like my thing is, you know, at the end of the interview, every time when they're like, oh, do you have any questions for this job? Always ask questions about that directly to the manager, directly to the employees that work there, to get an idea of how they feel and what that atmosphere is like.
Thank you, Mega. That's very nice.
Yeah, I think I will have to echo Mega's comments that it will be very dependent as well on the group, the area. I have been very fortunate to work in groups that have been very supportive. I'm not just going to call it inclusive, but supportive to me as an individual. But I know that then in other places in the same organization, other people don't feel the same way. So it varies. I can't tell you that Suncor, plug for Suncor, has very good inclusion and diversity groups, and they do meaningful work. Actually, we had yesterday a Indigenous gay professional. He's now an entrepreneur. But it was a very rough and raw conversation about how within a conversation with all the executives when he was at another company, he's been in 2 major companies actually, he heard the word faggot many times. And of course that, you know, does not sit good enough with him, or that he was even told, but you don't look Indigenous enough. Like, so talk about when you're trying to and he said, I have two things in me that have traditionally been seen as negative, you know? So it's difficult, but I overcame it. I came as angry at some points in time. And one of the people from the Indigenous Network said, yes, the angry Indigenous syndrome. I know it. Guess, yeah, people, yeah, just say that. But he said, I had also people who supported me, and then I overcame that, and now he leads a company that actually, works with Indigenous communities and all that. So it's, yes, I don't think that we can pinpoint that one company is better than the other. I think what Mega said is good. Research, do your research. If you know somebody through LinkedIn, you know who's in the company. If you know that person, ask that person, how is it working for that company in terms of, do they work long hours? Do they respect people? What is the, yeah. So, yeah, thank you.
That's a great advice, Mega and Martha. So hopefully you guys are taking notes. Well, everyone are taking notes.
Say guys.
Sorry, I mean everyone. I don't want to be exclusive. I want to know if there are questions in Edmonton. Okay, let's go ahead.
Thank you. Hello. So we spoke a lot today about the importance of having sponsors and champions and mentors, and specifically having mentors who have faced similar barriers as you. So I would love to find an engineering mentor who's like me, being both a woman and part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. So I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to find somebody that fits within your specific intersections.
Wow, who wants to take this one?
I don't feel like I can speak to the engineer. Yeah.
Can we have the question repeated, or sort of try, because there's something that gets lost with the sound. Yeah.
So it was basically how to find mentors in the engineering field who are women and 2S LGBTQ.
Okay.
Is that basically,
Or
other intersections. Yeah.
Okay. So there are, like, for example, Alicia mentioned CC West and AWSN, right? There are resources online if you're talking about just broad, right? But maybe you meant close, like in terms of within your organization or within the field. I'm not sure. But my general advice is, finding a mentor is one of those, it's building relationship, right? It's not like you go and find somebody who has a label on their face or something like that. So sometimes it's developing that relationship, again, build trust, right? And safety. So it does take mutual, both sides, to build that relation. And you wanted to think about, a process, right? Building that relation rather than it's a destination. I found one and that's it, because sometimes mentor can work at certain points, but as you move on, maybe it doesn't quite suit your needs, right? Our needs change as well. So it's an ongoing process, and be open-minded, right? Don't really predefine what the mentor should look like, right? Like in terms of attributes, but really think about how you can build relationship, build trust, and just getting advice from somebody who's more experienced in certain areas than you. And you can have multiple mentors. It doesn't have to be just one. And the other thing I found very powerful when I work with student groups is I heard from students that peer support groups can be as powerful as well, right? Oftentimes we just need to have a sounding board. We need to, almost like a confirmation, I'm not alone, and we all share these kind of concerns or experiences, and your peer group can be a great resources for support as well. So think about multiple things that you can do to support yourself.
Thank you. Jill, you wanted to say something?
No, that's okay. That was a
Okay.
great answer by Chell.
Okay, Mega.
Yeah, I'd love to add on to that. I really liked your point of saying you can have multiple mentors. So I know it's hard to find someone that would meet all of our intersections, and I can understand that, especially if you're marginalized in the workplace. So in terms of that, like I am a big proponent of having strong mentors in different areas. So, for example, I have a mentor that's a very talented technical engineer, and he's a white male, but super talented and very intelligent. So I really like to pick his brain on terms of like process information and that kind of stuff. And I really like the way he thinks through engineering problems. And if you're having an issue with more of like an interpersonal thing, you're looking for a mentorship that would help you with interpersonal issues at work and developing bonds that would better understand what it feels like to be a person of color or a woman. They don't necessarily have to be, someone in engineering. They could be anyone in leadership in that sense, that would identify closely to the problems that you're having. So having multiple mentors is huge. It's kind of like how I think of as friends, right? Like you can't have one friend that fills your whole bucket for all sorts of your, as much as it would be great. We have friends for different things. You might have friends for a certain sport. You might have friends for the gym. You might have friends for at the workplace, right? You have different friends group to fill your different buckets in your life, and you can have that with mentorship as well. And one thing, actually, my thesis for my master's is actually on mentorship and in the workplace and the impact it has on mental health. So that's actually, I'm a big proponent of mentorship and having good supervision. And I think something else to be noted is that your direct supervisor doesn't necessarily mean that they're your mentor. And to be able to differentiate between the two, because sometimes we think that our direct supervisor is our mentor, but that's not necessarily true. Making sure that you mentorship is a lot more complicated than managing and being a supervisor. So being open with that before just expecting that from someone is also important to understand if they can give you that mentorship. So, hey, I would like to meet once a month, or are you open to having these conversations outside of just the workplace and etc. So having that open, established relationship and being open with them in the beginning is really important as well.
Thank you, Mega. I think we have just a space for just one last question from the chat. If there is any question from the chat that you would like to ask to the panelists.
Yeah, so there's a question from the chat from Waterloo. How do we overcome the companies who do the surface compliance, for example, paying for a platform, instead of actually making a difference at work?
What was the question? How do we what?
So it mentions surface compliance, and instead of actually making a difference at work, like you're pretending, like the company.
Like, what do we do about that? Is that?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's a tough one.
That sort of goes back a little bit to the performative question from the person in Calgary. I don't know as an individual employee how much power we have over that sort of thing, but I guess my advice to anybody would be to get involved. If it's a company that you're already in, get involved in some way. Do they have employee resource groups? Do they have a D&I committee? If not, maybe suggest one. Do they have employee engagement activities? Like, what is there that you could contribute to? And I don't know if there are, so at the city, we've got mechanisms by which messages can reach senior leaders, either through employee resource networks. We also have, so basically the CEO of the city of Edmonton is the city manager. There's a city manager engagement team. He meets with them every 2 months, and anybody can add an agenda item. So if there are ways to raise the level of awareness of that sort of thing, that's just kind of what comes to mind for me right now.
Thank you, Jill. So you have to speak up through channels.
Yeah. And if, ultimately you're finding that the company your values don't align with that organization's values, you're probably not going to last there very long. And that's just a fact, right?
Okay. Well,
Andrea, here. We have one person in Calgary that would like to add on to that.
Wait, okay, but can you do it in like 30 seconds? Because we have to wrap up.
Super quick. And I just wanted to resonate what was already said, because I was going to jump in and say the same thing, is that you need to get involved. And because nobody's going to do it for you. If you see that there's an issue, jump in, volunteer, promote, be engaged. And if it doesn't align, if you don't like it, there's also the exit interviews. Find a company that does align with your views and be very clear and specific. We just had a lady leave a company and say, I felt like it was a toxic environment, which was shocking to us. But we're investigating, we're doing something about it, we're trying to get to the bottom of it. So you need to speak up because you're the advocate. You're here, you're representing women, diversity. You need to get engaged.
Thank you.
If I
Thank
can
you.
add one thing, just one thing. If your company does any kind of employee survey, do that survey. Fill that survey out and provide your perspective there.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. No, that's good. That's good. Just the very last question for our panelists, and I'll ask you to summarize this like in 30 seconds. If there was only one thing you hope the people in the audience today do because of our conversation, what would it be? So Jill, 30 seconds.
I would say explore what allyship means to you and what you can do.
Thank you. That was good. Mega.
I would say be easy on yourself. Like, you know, you can't control everything, and you can't, if you're excluded or if you feel like you're left out, you can really take that internally and really, you know, magnify that. But you just have to be easy on yourself. You can't do more than what you bargained for, I guess, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So be easy on yourself, look for allyship. Chow, what about you?
I would say there are many things. I think for individuals, identify one thing. I'm just kicking back. That you can do depending on your situation and the priorities you set for yourself. Whether you have confidence, kind of lack of confidence, then maybe that's one thing you can work on for the next 24 months. Or if you see there is culture in the workplace you're not happy with, maybe identify something you can do, like get involved, right? And there are many ways of getting involved, so maybe identify one, right? And this echoes what Mega says, go easy, right? Like we don't have to have a tall list of things that we're going to solve the problem of the world, right? But start with one thing. So yeah.
Thank you, Chow. That was very helpful. So be easy, allyship, and then get involved and work in something that you want to improve, kind of thing. Well, with that, we are going to give thank you for our panelists. We have to continue with the program. So we have a couple of good platforms.
Thank you, Jill.